and welcome to another tutorial. My name is Tanmay Bakshi, and this time we're going to be going over how you can use SiriKit with the new iOS 10 frameworks that Apple released in order to create a messaging application. Let's begin. So now, to begin, first of all, SiriKit. Now, with iOS 10, Apple has released numerous new APIs for developers, and one of them is actually SiriKit. And personally, and I know a lot of other developers, have been waiting for this for a long time. In fact, since iOS 7 or maybe even 6. And so, of course, finally, in June of this year, Apple had released SiriKit, and now that the iPhone 7s have released, I just thought, you know what? Why not create something that makes use of this new hardware and software? So I created a simple application that can help you as a sort of proof of concept of how to use SiriKit. Let's begin. So now, to begin, what is SiriKit? What will it allow you to do? So now, to begin, let's take a look at the Apple website. And you can see the Apple website right now. And the Apple website, it says that there are only a few sort of ways you can use Siri with iOS right now. And one of those ways is messaging, which we're going to be using today. However, in later videos, I may be covering other types of Siri uses as well, such as ride booking. Continuing though, so now, today, we're going to be talking about how to use SiriKit for a messaging application. Let's begin. So now, essentially, we're going to be creating an application called Chatter. Now, essentially, what we're going to be able to do is say to Siri, hey, send a Chatter message to Timothy saying, hi Tim, how are you? That's essentially what we're going to be able to say to Siri, and then our application, Chatter, will parse exactly, or technically Siri will parse what I said and give that information to my application, which it will then use to actually send they can send the actual message if it wants, it can just display it on screen, depends on what it wants to do with the data, but once it has the data, it's free to do whatever it wants with it. Continuing though, so now, as you can see, of course, we have our Chatter application. Now, how will this work? Essentially, I'm going to create, first of all, our iOS application. I'm also going to create an Intents application extension. Intents, and there's also an Intents UI, which we won't be covering today. But essentially, we're going to have our iOS application and our Intents, which will, of course, by the way, on screen right now, there's another video that I had released about wormholes. You should go check that out before you watch this video if you're going to be following along with the code. So I'd recommend you go watch that now. Alright, continuing. So now, as you can see, we're going to have a sort of this iOS end, the Intents end, and using the wormhole. We're going to be able to communicate with Intents. Alright, and that's how we're going to work. Now, essentially, what is Intents, if you're wondering? Now, essentially, if we take a look at the Apple website again, as you can see, there are many types of Siri use cases. And in this case, we're using messaging again. And so, now, when you're messaging, there can be many user intents. There can be a user intent to look up for messages that are unread. There can be intents the user could intend to look at all unread messages from Timothy, for example, or from James. Or the user could want to send a message, or there's so many types of intents or things that the user could want to do. And that's what intents will allow us to do with Siri. And so essentially, we're going to have this function, this class, which will inherit from or conform to a delegate for this sort of SiriKit or intents. And so what's going to happen is it's going to make us sort of create these functions, which will handle what happens when we receive an intent and that intent data. So let's say a function is called and we're passed an intent to send a message Alright. Okay, and this message is supposed to go to, I don't know, John. To John. Alright, this is going to be from yourself, of course. But we're going to say, what else? What do we say in the message? The content. That's going to be, let's say, like, hi, John. That's going to be the content of the message, and that's essentially what we're going to receive in the intent. And so what we can do with this is, of course, we can send the message, we can do whatever we want, but essentially Siri has parsed this out and given it to us. Let's say the user wants to search for messages, they can do that as well, and that's handled in a separate intent. And that's essentially how it's going to work. Alright, so that was a quick rundown of SiriKit itself, and now let's get to the Mac part, where I'm going to be showing you how you can create a simple chatter application with SiriKit, and of course I may just integrate this with my chatting application video that I created a little while ago, so you can, of course, there's a link to that in the description, and so you can check that out if you'd like to, and I'm going to be integrating SiriKit with that soon. Alright, let's get to the Mac part, where I'm going to be showing you how to implement this. So, welcome back to the Mac part, and now I'm going to be showing you how you can actually use SiriKit in your applications. And of course, as an example today, I have the Chatter application open. So as you can see here on my Mac screen, I have my iPhone mirrored to the actual to my Mac. And so let's begin. So now essentially what I'm going to be able to do is talk to Siri and have it send a message for me through Chatter, and then Chatter should be able to display who the message was supposed to be sent to and what the message said. So let's try it out, shall we? Send a Chatter message to James Archieri.
What do you want to say to James R. Siri?
Hi James, how are you, ? I was just wondering when you have time to come down to Toronto for the Facebook event, .
Ready to send it?
Yes.
It's sent.
As you can see, we were able to tell it to send a Chatter message to James Archieri. It asked us what to say in the Chatter message. I told it exactly what I wanted it to say. It showed me a quick little UI here that shows us it's going to James Archieri and the actual message with a nice little interface there. And then I told it that yes, I do want to send the message, and of course it's been sent. And then I can actually go to my application, and if I click anywhere on the screen of this application here, you probably cannot see this on the camera, but if I click anywhere on the screen of this application, it'll update, and as you can see, my last message was sent to James Archieri, and this is exactly what it said. Hi James, how are you? I was just wondering when you have time to come down to Toronto for the Facebook event, which is exactly what I said. Alright, so that was a neat little example, but now let's go over the code, and then I'll show you some more neat examples of how you can actually sort of rephrase what you're talking about, and Siri will still understand how and who to send the message to. Alright, continuing. So now, let's begin with how we begin. So first of all, you create the Chatter application, and once you do, you start out with general. So now here, you don't really need to do much. So when you go to capabilities, however, you have to enable the Siri capability in your app ID, and of course the app groups capability. Now again, if you haven't already, I'd again really recommend that you watch my wormhole tutorial first. This will really help you out. But continuing. So now, with app groups, I can essentially say, okay, so the current app group that I'm using is group.com.tbss.SiriKit because, this is the SiriKit example that I'm creating. However, you can really use whatever you want. I'd recommend using your app's name, because that just really makes it simple when you need to find your app group in the future. But, essentially, of course, I'm using this so it will have a hole, or a sort of way to transfer data between the SiriKit app extension and the actual iOS application itself. Continuing, however, now once you are done this, you need to also go to your info.plist file and add this row, privacy, Siri usage description, and in this case I just have chatter here. You should actually probably put in a real description of why you want to use Siri in your application if you are planning on submitting this to the App Store. However, I just have chatter written here. Continuing though, as you can see, I have also integrated the files from the Wormhole source code, and as I said in my Wormhole tutorial as well, once I dragged these in, I selected all three of my targets, Chatter, Chatter Intense, and Chatter Intense UI, which I will get into in just a moment. And as you can see, it has created three bridging headers, one for Chatter Intense, and one for Chatter Intense UI. And for each one, I've imported www.wormhole.h and mmwormhole.h and mmwormholesession.h. These are the two sort of essential files that you need to use wormholes in your application. Continuing, however, what your next step is to go to General again, go to this little tab here, as you can see. Click on the plus button down there and click on an intense extension under iOS. Call this really whatever you want. In this case, I'm just going to call it Chatter Intense. Alright, and so the rest can stay the same. Make sure that the Include UI extension is selected. I'm not actually currently creating a UI extension, but in the future, with a part 2, if I do want to create one, it just really helps out to already have the UI extension there and linked to your project. Continuing though, if I continue now, essentially what I can do is if I click on Finish. Oh, well, I mean, the target already exists, but yeah, what I can essentially do is I can, just a second, so I can essentially, so I can essentially have those two targets for the Chatter Intense, which is essentially the main SiriKit thing that you want visible for Siri, and of course the Chatter Intense UI, which is what I mean, as you saw in the iOS end, when you actually use Siri, there's that little UI that pops up once you tell it to send a message, and so essentially you can actually design that UI, which I will be covering in a separate tutorial. Today, I'm just teaching you how you can actually integrate Siri with your application. Continuing though, now let's go over the interface, shall we? So now in the interface, very, very simple, just two labels over here, one for who the message was sent to, one for what the message said, and of course the actual labels that contain the content themselves. One is to label, and one is content label. And if I go to my viewcontroller.swift file, as you can see, those are the IB outlets for those two labels. I'm also, of course, creating the constant for my wormhole. In this case, I'm using my app group that I created, and my optional directory is SiriKit example. I'm also creating two variables, to and content, that will store whatever comes back from the wormhole. And in my viewDidLoad function, now there's something here. Essentially, what you need to do is on your first run of your application, you need to ask the user if they want your application to be able to be compatible with Siri. And so essentially this is what this code does. It'll use the intense preferences and it'll request Siri authorization. And so of course you're going to need to import intense for this. And of course this will essentially, this will, of course, request for authorization to use Siri using that description that you provided in the info.plist file. And it'll also make sure not to ask twice. If it's already asked and if it has permission, it will not ask again, which is just great, so I don't need to implement logic for finding out if it's the first run of the application. Really convenient. Next, in the viewDidAppear function, which I'm overriding, of course, from UI View Controller, I've essentially allowed the wormhole to listen for a message that has the identifier toMessage. So now this is essentially the channel, I guess, of the wormhole, which will contain who we're sending the message to. And of course, content message will contain what the content is of the message that we're sending. And so essentially what I can say is in each of these code blocks, as you know from the wormhole tutorial, which again I highly recommend you watch, there is a sort of parameter or variable that comes in with this asynchronous function or code block called result, or in this case I'm calling it res for result. And so I'm just checking really quickly, making sure that's not nil. So I'm checking if let message is equal to res, in which case this will run. It'll set the to variable that I created to the message as a string, because this, as I mentioned in my previous tutorial, is an optional any, and so I'm converting this to a string. And same thing for content message, except this time I'm setting the content variable to my message as a string. And then in the touches began function, which is where I do most of my updating, I'm just setting the to labels text to the to variable and the content labels text to the content. But now, how does Siri actually integrate with this? Well, that's where, as you can see, I created my chatter intents target. And using this chatter intents target, I have the intent handler.swift file. And this is essentially where all the heavy lifting happens for Siri. And this is where all the calculations, or not calculations necessarily, but this is where you handle what happens with Siri in your messaging application. And so let's begin. So now I'm going to just run down this code. And so as you can see, we are at the beginning importing intents and foundation. And there are a few comments already created by Apple as to how you could use this code. But continuing, now first of all we're creating a class called intent handler, which inherits from or conforms to intents extension, intent send message intent handling, intents search for messages intent handling, and intents set message attribute intent handling. Now, you don't exactly need to know what these mean. It's essentially sort of the delegates or the handlers for creating a messaging application which is compatible with Siri and SiriKit. Now in this class, of course, I'm creating my constant for the wormhole, which is again using the same app group that I gave it in my viewcontroller.swift, and the same optional directory as well, in this case called SiriKit example. Now this is just, the default implementation. We don't really need to worry about this function. But this is the first really useful function that we need to worry about. So now, essentially, this is the resolve recipients function. Now, this function will allow me to essentially take an intent called intent send message intent, and it'll have a completion, which I'll get into. But essentially, what this is going to do is it's going to be a method that will choose which contact you are sending your message to. Now, in this specific case, it's just going to go with whatever you give it. If you tell Siri to send a message to, I don't know, Tim, and let's say Tim isn't in your contact list, it'll still go with it. But you could integrate some sort of logic to tell Siri that, hey, Tim isn't in the contact list, did you mean Timothy? Or something of that sort. But in this case, it'll just go with whatever you give it in Siri. Continue. In a future tutorial I can, of course, tell you exactly how you would do that, but for now, it just goes with whatever Siri gives you. Next, the resolve content, which is actually very, very simple. This is just, now, also one more thing really quickly. These resolve functions essentially take whatever you gave from Siri, and it's sort of asking you, hey, did the user give enough information in what he said? And let's say the user said, send a chatter message to James Archieri. Well, then he said the recipients, but he didn't say what exactly he wanted to say to them, which is the content. And so in this case, in the resolve content, as you can see, we're checking if they've actually given that content. If they have, then great, success. If they haven't, then we need that value. And we're calling that completion handler for Siri, which will handle what happens next. And then, of course, Apple, or Siri specifically, handles all that natural language processing and all those steps in between as well, which makes it very, very convenient for developers. But But then once you're done resolving all of those things, you are done handling all the recipients that we need to send to, done handling the content, and in different types of applications there could be more things to resolve or less things to resolve, then in this case we're going to confirm that, of course, do you actually want to send this message? And if the user says yes, then great, we're just going to continue with whatever Siri wants us to continue with. And then this is the actual logic that sends the message itself. Now, this is where it gets a little interesting, where, now before, if I show you, this is the code that I've added. Before it was just this much. But with my code added in, essentially what this does is it'll check, first of all, we do have the message content, we have the message recipients, and once we have determined all of that, it'll create a toMessage variable, and it'll take the first recipient and get the display name of that recipient, because, I mean, this application isn't designed to send to multiple people, only one person, and so it's going to take the first recipient and get the display name, which is a string, of course. And then what's going to happen, this is the really interesting part, it uses the wormhole and passes a message object, which is toMessage as an NS string, to the toMessage channel, and so, ViewController will get this variable and store it in the to variable that I've declared in ViewController. And then the wormhole pass message object message content as NS string. Now, as I said in my wormhole tutorial, the reason I'm converting these to NS string is because it has to be NS coding compliant. Again, if you have questions about that, just check out my wormhole video and you'll find out. And of course, I'm sending this on the channel content message. If we go back to ViewController, as you can see, toMessage and content message, sorry. And after this, it has sent through the wormhole, and we are calling our completion, and then Siri can continue with whatever it needs to continue with. Then, finally, there's one last handler, which is, let's say the user asks, let's search through my unread messages. And so this is essentially the function that'll get called for that, in search for messages intent. And then, of course, you can sort of give it the messages that it needs to search through, or the unread messages that Siri should respond with, which is an in message, which in turn takes the identifier, the content of the message, the date sent, the sender, which in this case is Sarah, and the recipients, which in this case is John. And that was it for that code walkthrough. So now, I'm going to show you really quickly a quick demo of a few more Siri phrases here. So now let's try this out. Let's try out this time Chatter Marcus Kempen.
What do you want to say to Marcus Kempen?
Hi Marcus, I was able to practice my table tennis serve, so do you have time this weekend to meet up, ?
Ready to send it?
Yes.
It's sent.
Alright, great. So now as you can see, essentially what I was able to do is I was able to say chatter Marcus Kempen as a verb this time. And so I could say chatter, and it would understand that, hey, chatter Marcus Kempen means send a message to Marcus Kempen via chatter. It asked me what I wanted to say to Marcus Kempen, so I told it exactly what I wanted to say. It asked me, it just, confirmed, and once I said yes, it was sent, and so in that step, it got sent through the wormhole, and if I click on the application, it says, your last message was sent to Marcus Kempen, and it said, hi Marcus, I was able to practice my table tennis serve, so do you have time this weekend to meet up? Alright, let's try out one last thing. Let's say chatter John Maxwell Cone.
What do you want to say to John Maxwell Cone?
Hi John, I had some really new and interesting Watson IoT ideas, so do you have any time to meet up soon? ?
Ready to send it?
Yes.
It's sent.
And as you can see, if I click on the application, the application was given information by Siri, and it was able to parse that and display it in a label. Alright, so that was pretty interesting. So now again, really quick recap. Siri does all the natural language processing. You can phrase it really however you want. You can use it as an action in this case. Like, for example, you can say chatter John Maxwell Cohn instead of just send a chatter message to John Maxwell Cohn. And then it'll be able to parse that out and tell Chatter that we want to send a message through your application. And then Siri will do, as I said, all the NLP and give you who the message is supposed to be sent to, even if there are multiple recipients. It'll choose from the contact list for you. It'll do all that sort of stuff, and it'll even take out the content. And plus, you can create your own little UI for Siri, so you have your own little message interface, and that is very interesting. And of course, a more detailed look at SiriKit is going to be coming soon to the channel. But that's going to be it for today. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed. If this video helped you out, or if you think it could help someone else out, please share the video with whoever you think it might help, and maybe even leave a like down below. And also, if you like my content and you want to see more of it, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. It really does help out a lot. Again, if you have any suggestions, comments, or feedback, or even questions, leave them down in the comments below. You can email me at taggymanny@gmail.com, or even tweet to me at taggymanny. That's going to be it for this tutorial. Thank you very much. Goodbye.